Picture a Wyoming night in 1878, where a lone gray stallion's hoof thunders against a shed wall at 3 a.m., waking an Apache camp with a cry that's not rage, but a desperate call. Eliza Harper, a widow scarred by loss, hears that echo in her dreams, pulling her toward a horse stolen by war. She's no hero, just a woman chasing the last piece of her shattered family. The camp whispers of a haunted beast, but what waits in that shed could unravel a warrior's pride and rewrite a widow's fate. This story's ending has left hearts trembling. Will Eliza reclaim her soul or lose it to the wild? Hit subscribe, share your town below, and don't miss the moment one whispered name silences a storm. The Wyoming night in 1878 clawed at the world with a bitter wind, sharp as a skinning knife. Eliza Harper, 42 and hollowed by grief, sat bolt upright in her sagging bed, the echo of a hoofbeat still ringing in her skull. Her small cabin, perched on the edge of the valley, creaked under the weight of silence. 5 years ago, Apache raiders had torn through her life, leaving her husband's blood soaking the dirt and her gray stallion, Ash, stolen into the dark. Now, every night, she dreamed of that same thud, slow, heavy, deliberate, like a heartbeat trapped in fog. It wasn't just a dream, it was a call. She swung her boots onto the cold floor, the wood groaning like it shared her pain. Moonlight sliced through a cracked shutter, catching the glint of her husband's old hunting knife on the table. Eliza's hands, rough as saddle leather, trembled as she tied her gray hair back. Her face, etched by sun and sorrow, held no softness, only the hard lines of a woman who'd learned to bury hope but couldn't kill it. The dream had come again, clearer this time. Ash, her Ash, slamming his hoof against a wall somewhere out there, waiting. 50 miles away, in a sprawl of hide tents and smoldering fires, the Apache camp crouched under the same moon. The air stank of smoke and horse sweat. In a weathered shed at the camp's edge, a tall gray stallion stood, his coat dull from hunger, but his eyes burning like struck flint. Ash. Captured in a winter raid along the migrant trail, he was Black Hawk's prize, a trophy no warrior could tame. At exactly 3 a.m., he reared back and drove his hoof into the shed's western wall. Thud. The sound wasn't wild or frantic. It was measured, like a man knocking on a locked door. He struck once, then froze, ears pricked, as if listening for an answer that never came. The camp stirred. A young warrior, Little Crow, flinched in his sleep, muttering about spirits. An older man, Gray Wolf, spat into the dirt and cursed the haunted beast. Black Hawk, the leader, stood at his tent flap, his broad frame silhouetted against the firelight. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, fixed on the shed. He'd taken Ash for his strength, but this nightly ritual unnerved even him. "He calls for someone," Black Hawk said to no one, his voice low. "Or something." Back in her cabin, Eliza lit a lantern, its weak glow dancing across walls patched with mud and memory. She pulled on a worn coat, the one her husband used to wear, and tucked the knife into her belt. The dream wasn't just torment, it was a map. Yesterday, a trader passing through had spoken of a gray horse in the Apache camp, one that kicked walls and spooked men. "They say it's cursed," he'd said, spitting tobacco. "Calls for its master." Eliza's heart had lurched. Ash was alive. She knew it like she knew the ache in her bones. She stepped outside, the frost crunching under her boots. The valley stretched before her, a sea of shadow and sagebrush, with the Bighorn Mountains looming like silent judges. Her old mare, Daisy, snorted in the lean-to, her breath clouding in the cold. Eliza checked the saddlebags. A waterskin, hardtack, a rope, and her husband's rusted pistol, barely functional. The Apache camp was a 3-day ride through land that chewed up the careless. Raiders, wolves, or worse could end her. But the thud in her dream was louder than fear. In the Apache camp, Ash struck the wall again. Thud. A splinter cracked loose, skittering into the straw. Little Crow, tasked with guarding the shed, gripped his spear tighter. "Kill it," he whispered to himself, but he didn't move. Blackhawk appeared, his shadow swallowing the doorway. "He doesn't fight," the leader said, staring at Ash. "He waits." The stallion's eyes met his, unyielding, and Blackhawk felt a chill that wasn't from the wind. Eliza saddled Daisy, her hand steady now. The trader's words had lit a fire in her gut. Ash wasn't just a horse. He was the last thread tying her to the life she'd lost. She mounted up, the leather creaking, and looked back at her cabin, small and lonely against the vast dark. "I'm coming, boy," she whispered. The conflict was clear. A lone woman against a warrior camp, chasing a horse that might already be broken. But Ash's hoofbeat echoed in her blood, and she'd ride through hell to answer it. Eliza's whispered promise to Ash hung in the Wyoming air as she spurred Daisy forward, the mare's hooves kicking up frostbitten earth. The night was a predator, its cold jaws snapping at her exposed neck, but the echo of that hoofbeat drove her on. The valley sprawled ahead, a brutal expanse of sagebrush and shadow, stitched together by trails that promised death as often as direction. It was 1878, and Wyoming didn't care if you were brave or broken. It chewed up both. Dawn broke like a cracked rib, gray and painful. Eliza's coat, threadbare and heavy with dew, clung to her shoulders. Daisy plodded along a narrow path, her breath puffing white in the chill. The Bighorn Mountains loomed to the north, their peaks jagged as a busted fence. Eliza's eyes, sharp despite the ache in her bones, scanned the horizon for movement. Raiders, wolves, or the ghosts of her own mistakes. Her saddlebags held little, a half-empty water skin, a fistful of hardtack, and the rusted pistol that might not even fire. The Apache camp lay 2 days off, but the land between was a gauntlet. By noon, the trail dipped into a shallow draw, where a cluster of wagons huddled like scared cattle. A settler camp, ragged and temporary, their faces as worn as the canvas flapping in the wind. Eliza slowed Daisy, her hand brushing the knife at her belt. A man with a beard like tangled wire stepped forward, his rifle loose but ready. "Name's Jacob Reed," he said, voice rough as gravel. "You lost, woman?" Eliza met his gaze, her jaw tight. "Not lost. Headed to the Apache camp." Whispers rippled through the settlers. A woman in a faded bonnet crossed herself. Jacob spat into the dirt. "Blackhawk's camp? You're chasing death. They don't barter with white folk, especially not women." Eliza's fingers tightened on the reins. "They've got my horse. I'm taking him back." Jacob's eyes narrowed, then softened, like he saw something in her that reminded him of his own losses. "Heard about a gray stallion," he said. "Kicks walls at night, scares their warriors speechless. Is that your beast?" Eliza nodded, her throat dry. Jacob shook his head. "Turn back. Ain't worth your blood." She didn't answer. The settlers' warnings buzzed like flies, but the memory of Ash's thud drowned them out. She nudged Daisy past the wagons, ignoring their stares. The trail climbed now, winding through chokecherry thickets and rocky outcrops. The sun burned cold, offering no warmth. Eliza ate a crumbling piece of hardtack, her teeth grinding against the grit. She thought of Ash, his proud neck bowed under Apache ropes, and her chest tightened. He wasn't just a horse. He was the last thing she'd loved that hadn't died. Dusk painted the sky bruise purple, and the trail grew treacherous, studded with loose shale. Daisy's hooves slipped, forcing Eliza to dismount and lead her. The wind carried a faint howl. Coyote or something worse. Then, from the shadows of a dry creek bed, two figures emerged, their silhouettes lean and hungry. Bandits, not Apache, but just as deadly. Their eyes glinted like buzzards spotting carrion. "Nice horse," the taller one rasped, a knife flashing in his hand. The other, squat and bearded, circled to her left, a club dangling from his fist. Eliza's hand slid to her pistol, but the rusted hammer felt like a lie. "Walk away," she said, voice steady as stone. The tall one laughed, lunging for Daisy's reins. Eliza swung her knife, slicing his forearm. He cursed, staggering back. But the bearded one charged, his club grazing her shoulder. Pain flared, hot and sharp. She stumbled, and they were on her, wrenching the reins free. Daisy reared, then bolted as the tall one slashed her saddlebags loose. They grabbed the water skin and hardtack, leaving Eliza sprawled in the dust, blood trickling from her lip. The bandits vanished into the dark, their laughter fading with Daisy's hoofbeats. Eliza lay there, the ground cold against her cheek. Her shoulder throbbed, her supplies gone, her mare stolen. The stars above were pitiless, offering no answers. She was alone, 50 miles from nowhere, with nothing but a knife and a half-broken pistol. Despair clawed at her, whispering to give up, to let the valley claim her like it had her husband. Then, faint as a prayer, the wind carried a sound, a slow, heavy thud, like a hoof striking wood. Ash. She pushed herself up, her breath ragged. The dream was no dream, was a beacon. She'd walk if she had to, bleed if she must, but she'd reach that camp. Ash was waiting, and hell itself wouldn't stop her. Eliza staggered to her feet, the Wyoming dirt clinging to her bloodied lip like a cruel reminder of the valley's indifference. The faint thud of Ash's hoof, carried by the wind, was a lifeline pulling her from despair. She clutched her knife, the only thing the bandits hadn't taken, and started walking. The Apache camp was out there, somewhere beyond the sagebrush and starlight, and she'd crawl through this forsaken land if it meant reaching her horse. The night stretched thin, a black veil torn by the howl of distant coyotes. Eliza's shoulder burned where the bandits' club had struck, each step a needle in her bones. Wyoming in 1878 was a graveyard for the unprepared, its trails winding through gullies and scrub-like veins in a dying beast. Her boots crunched on frozen gravel, the sound sharp against the silence. The pistol, useless as it was, weighed heavy in her coat. She'd lost Daisy, her supplies, everything but the fire in her gut. Ash's call wasn't just a memory, it was a command. By dawn, the trail led to a shallow creek, its water cold enough to bite. Eliza knelt, splashing her face, the sting waking her dulled senses. Her reflection stared back, gaunt and unyielding, the face of a woman who'd buried a husband, but wouldn't bury hope. She thought of Ash, his gray coat matted under Apache ropes, his hoof striking that shed wall. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind. "A horse knows your heart, Eliza. Speak true, and he'll hear." She drank sparingly, her cracked lips stinging, and pressed on, the creek's gurgle fading behind her. The sun climbed, merciless despite the chill, baking the earth to a hard crust. Eliza's legs trembled, hunger gnawing at her insides. She followed a deer path through a tangle of juniper, its thorns snagging her coat like greedy fingers. A shadow flickered ahead, a jackrabbit, not a man. But her hand flew to her knife anyway. The valley was alive with threats, and she was one woman, small against its vastness. Yet every step brought her closer to the camp, to Ash, to the piece of herself she'd lost. In the Apache camp, tension coiled like a rattler. Ash's nightly ritual had grown fiercer, his hoof splintering the shed wall. Blackhawk stood outside, his breath clouding in the morning air, watching the stallion through a crack in the wood. Ash's eyes, bright with defiance, met his, and the leader's jaw tightened. "Tie him tighter," he ordered Little Crow, who hesitated, spear in hand. "He'll break free again," the young warrior muttered. Black Hawk's gaze darkened. "Then let him. I want to see what he's calling." Eliza, miles away, reached a rise overlooking a dry wash. The Apache camp lay beyond, a smudge of smoke against the horizon. Her heart quickened, but exhaustion dragged at her. She sank behind a boulder, catching her breath. If this story of a lone woman chasing her horse across a brutal land speaks to you, hit subscribe. It's your support that keeps these tales alive. Share your town in the comments. I'd love to know where you're writing from. Eliza didn't have a crowd cheering her on, but she had Ash, and that was enough. Night fell, a heavy curtain of stars. Eliza crept closer, her boots silent on the sandy earth. The camp's fires glowed, voices drifting, low, guttural, Apache. She crouched in a thicket, her pulse hammering. The shed stood at the camp's edge, its weathered boards lit by moonlight. Then it came. Thud. Ash's hoof, steady as a war drum. Eliza's breath caught. He was there, alive, calling her. She edged forward, knife ready, but a twig snapped underfoot. Shadows moved. 3 warriors, faces painted with ash, surrounded her, their spears glinting. She froze, outnumbered, her pistol useless against their speed. They bound her wrists with rawhide, dragging her to the camp's center. Black Hawk emerged, his presence like a storm cloud. "A white woman," he said, voice cold as iron. "You come for death?" Eliza's chin lifted, her eyes steady. "I come for my horse." The warriors laughed, but Black Hawk didn't. He studied her, then gestured to a tent. "Lock her up. She'll draw the settlers." As they shoved her inside, Eliza's hope flickered. The tent's walls closed in, her hands bound, her mission shattered. She was trapped, a fool in a warrior's den. Then, through the hide, she heard it. Thud. Ash, still kicking, still waiting. Her fight wasn't over. The thud of Ash's hoof pulsed through the hide walls of the tent, a steady rhythm that kept Eliza's heart from breaking. She sat in the dark, wrists raw from the rawhide bindings, the Apache camp's murmurs seeping through the night. Wyoming's cold sank into her bones, but the sound of her horse, alive, defiant, lit a spark in her chest. She wasn't done yet. The tent smelled of earth and smoke, its shadows thick as tar. Eliza's fingers, bruised but steady, traced the ground until they found a jagged stone, sharp enough to bite. She worked it against the rawhide, each scrape a quiet rebellion. Her shoulder throbbed, her lip still crusted with blood, but her husband's words rang clear. "A horse knows your heart." Ash knew hers, and she'd carve her way to him. The bindings loosened, then fell. She gripped her knife, the blade a cold comfort in her palm. Outside, a storm brewed, the wind howling like a wounded beast. Snowflakes stung the air, cloaking the camp in a white haze. Eliza slipped through the tent's flap, her boots silent on the frozen ground. The fires had dwindled, their embers hissing under the snow. Warriors huddled in their tents, but sentries still patrolled, their silhouettes blurred by the blizzard. She moved low, a shadow among shadows, her breath clouding in the frigid air. The shed stood 50 yards off, its outline faint but unmistakable. Another thud echoed, Ash's hoof striking the wall, calling her through the storm. In the shed, Ash pawed the straw, his gray coat slick with sweat. The ropes binding him were taut, but his eyes burned with a fire no knot could hold. Little Crow, stationed outside, shivered, his spear trembling. "Quiet, demon," he muttered, but Ash struck again, the wood groaning. Black Hawk, woken by the noise, strode through the snow, his face a mask of stone. "He wants something," the leader said, his voice low. Or someone. Little Crow shook his head. It's just a horse. Black Hawk's gaze lingered on the shed, uneasy. Eliza crept closer, the storm her ally. She ducked behind a stack of hides, her heart pounding as a sentry passed, his boots crunching inches away. The shed was near now, its door barred with a heavy log. She needed to move fast. The snow thickened, swallowing sound, but another thud cut through, guiding her. She reached the shed, her fingers fumbling with the bar, when a shout split the air. Black Hawk's voice, sharp as a blade. "Who's there?" Warriors emerged, lanterns swinging, their light slicing through the blizzard. Eliza froze, knife in hand, her back against the shed. The bar was half lifted, but footsteps closed in. She could run, lose herself in the storm, but Ash was here, so close. She dropped the bar and turned, facing the light. Black Hawk stood 10 paces off, snow dusting his broad shoulders, his eyes locking onto hers. Warriors flanked him, spears raised, their faces hard with suspicion. "The white woman," Black Hawk said, his tone a mix of scorn and curiosity. "You escaped to die." Eliza's voice was steady, carved from the same steel as her resolve. "I came for my horse. Let me see him." The warriors laughed, their breath clouding, but Black Hawk raised a hand, silencing them. He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. "You risk death for a beast?" Eliza didn't flinch. "He's mine. You know he doesn't belong here." Another thud rang out, louder, the shed wall shuddering. Black Hawk's eyes flicked to the sound, then back to her. He nodded to the shed. "Open it." A warrior lifted the bar, and Eliza stepped inside, the storm's howl fading behind her. Ash stood in the dimness, ropes cutting into his hide, his head high. His eyes met hers, and the air shifted, heavy with recognition. Eliza moved forward, her voice soft, but sure. "Ash, it's me." The stallion trembled, his ears twitching. She reached out, her hand steady, and whispered his name again. Ash tore free of the ropes, the snap of hemp echoing like a gunshot. He stepped to her, lowering his head, his muzzle brushing her palm. Black Hawk watched from the doorway, his warriors silent. The storm raged outside, but inside, time stopped. Eliza's hand rested on Ash's neck, her fingers tracing his warmth. She turned to Black Hawk, her eyes fierce. "He's mine." The leader said nothing, his face unreadable. Then he stepped aside, gesturing to the open door. The warriors parted, and Eliza led Ash into the snow, the stallion stepped steady beside her. The camp watched, struck dumb as a woman and her horse walked free. Eliza led Ash through the snow, the Apache camp fading into the storm's white roar. The stallion's warmth under her hand anchored her against the biting wind, his steady steps a quiet triumph. Wyoming's dawn crept over the horizon, pale and raw, painting the valley in shades of ash and iron. She'd faced warriors, bandits, and her own breaking heart to reclaim him. Now, with Ash beside her, the path home felt less like a retreat and more like a reckoning. The blizzard eased as they descended from the camp's ridge, the snow thinning to a fine dust. Eliza walked, her boots sinking into the softening earth, her shoulders stiff but ignored. Ash's breath clouded the air, his gray coat catching the first rays of sunlight. She had no saddle, no reins, just trust, hard-won and unbreakable. The valley stretched wide, its sagebrush and rock scarred by winter's grip. The Bighorn Mountains stood sentinel, their peaks less menacing now, as if nodding to her survival. Wyoming in 1878 was no kinder today than yesterday, but Eliza moved through it differently, her spine straighter, her eyes clear. They followed a faint trail, one she'd pieced together from memory and desperation. Her cabin lay 3 days off, a speck of wood and mud that held her past. Hunger gnawed at her. The bandits' theft, leaving her with nothing but the knife in her belt and the useless pistol in her coat. She plucked a handful of bitter choke cherries, their tang sharp on her tongue, and shared them with Ash, his lips brushing her palm. He snorted, shaking his mane, and she almost smiled. "We're a pair, ain't we?" she muttered, her voice rough but warm. By noon, the trail skirted a shallow canyon, its walls streaked red like old blood. A hawk circled above, its cry slicing the silence. Eliza's legs ached, her body screaming for rest, but stopping felt like tempting fate. She scanned the horizon, half expecting Apache riders to pursue, but the land was empty. Black Hawk's silence as she'd left, his step aside, his warriors' lowered spears, had been no promise of safety. Yet something in his eyes had shifted, a grudging respect for the bond she and Ash shared. She didn't trust it, but she'd take the head start. Dusk fell, painting the sky a bruised violet. Eliza found a hollow beneath a cottonwood, its roots curling like gnarled fingers. She sank against it, Ash grazing nearby, his tail flicking at the evening chill. Sleep tugged at her, but she fought it, her knife in hand. The stars emerged, sharp as bullet holes, and she thought of her husband, his laughter, the way he'd taught Ash to bow for a sugar lump. Grief was there, heavy as ever, but it didn't choke her now. Ash lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, and she felt it, a tether to the life she'd almost lost. The second day brought a traitor's path, rutted by wagon wheels. Eliza mounted Ash bareback, his strength steadying her. His gait was smooth, like he knew her exhaustion. They passed a burned-out homestead, its charred beams jutting like broken bones. A reminder. The West forgave no one. She urged Ash on, the cabin closer now. At a stream, she drank deeply, the water cold and sweet. Ash waded in, splashing her boots, and she laughed, a small, real sound that startled her. It was the first in years. On the third morning, the cabin came into view, its slanted roof dusted with frost. Eliza dismounted, her legs buckling briefly. Ash nudged her, his muzzle warm against her neck. She led him to the lean-to, once Daisy's, now his. The valley was quiet, no thud of hooves, no echo of loss. She built a fire, the smoke curling like a prayer. Neighbors, drawn by word of her return, arrived with bread and questions. "Heard you faced Black Hawk," Old Man Reed said, eyeing Ash. Eliza nodded, her hand on the stallion's flank. "He's home now." The story spread of a widow who'd walked into a warrior's camp and walked out with her horse. Eliza didn't care for the talk. She cared for the mornings, when Ash stood by the fence, his coat gleaming, no longer waiting. The valley felt alive again, not with accusation, but with purpose. She'd lost much, her husband, her mare, her softer self. But she'd gained something, too. A voice, carved from pain and proof. Ash grazed under the cottonwood, and Eliza watched, the weight of years lighter now. The West hadn't broken her. It had forged her. What did Eliza's journey stir in you? Was her fight for Ash worth the scars, or would you have turned back? Drop your thoughts below. I'm eager to hear where this story took you. Your voices keep these tales alive, and I'm grateful for every one of you riding along. Until we meet again under Wyoming's stars, keep chasing what calls your heart. If you're hungry for more stories of grit and grace, let me know what you'd love to hear next.